Well, hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. I've got Dr. Will Cole here. He is the best-selling author of Ketotarian, as well as the Inflammation Spectrum, and his new book, Intuitive Fasting, the flexible 4-week intermittent fasting plan to recharge your metabolism and renew your health. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm pushing the book up right here so you guys can see it. It's a beautiful book, and I always enjoy reading Will's content. He does a really great job at just explaining a lot of these topics and also making them very applicable. He's working with patients full time. And so, a lot of these kinds of topics when it comes to ketogenic diet, when it comes to elimination diets and intermittent fasting, there's incredible science and, there's a lot of exciting things to talk about with that. However, there's a lot of nuances when it comes to putting it into practice. And so when you're a clinician, you're working with people, you realize it's not a one size fits all. And Dr. Will really does a good job of that in his book. And we're going to talk about that in today's podcast. So Dr. Will, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, man. I appreciate the kind words. And yeah, I'm glad it takes a podcast for us to sit down and talk sometimes, but we're both busy. So I'm excited that it's happening.
I know. I think I talked to you, it was around this time last year. You were actually one of the first interviews we did on our podcast. Now we're like 100 and this will probably be like 120, right? So,
wow.
As far as our podcast. So there you go. Yep. So your second time on, which is good because you always have you have a wide plethora of topics that you're an expert in and really enjoy picking your brain on these topics. So what was the inspiration behind intuitive fasting and writing this book?
Well, I think that it's as with anything that I write, I just love writing. A lot of what I do with my patients, it's education and informing and saying things that you said are more maybe or more academic or abstract and like, how do you use this in a practical way in everyday life? I'm constantly used to kind of transmuting that into everyday life. So I love writing about this stuff, not just talking about it. And so it's born out of my clinical practice, but it's this conversation that I've always tried to really inform my patients on is how do you have a mindful approach to fasting, a mindful approach to wellness at large? How do you have a mindful approach to food? So this concept is interwoven throughout all the books that I've written in Ketotarian, the Inflammation Spectrum. And this is just this mindful approach to intermittent fasting. And it's paradoxical on purpose because it's also a conversation around metabolic flexibility. Because if someone's metabolically inflexible or metabolically rigid and they're bound by hangriness and blood sugar roller coasters and insatiable cravings, that's going to be things that are proverbial noise that will drown out the voice of our intuition on what really serves us, like what's really going to better our life, what's going to improve our energy, what's going to improve our health, what's going to make us feel great. Well, those dysregulations in the body, physical level, will perpetuate you feeling horrible. You will go for things that will actually perpetuate you feeling horrible 9 times out of 10. Yeah. So it's really a functional medicine conversation about calming the noise in the body. So you can actually hear that resolute voice of your intuition to have authentic mindful eating or intuitive eating and authentic intuitive fasting, not because it's some arduous restrictive thing, but because you and I both know when someone's more metabolically flexible, you can go longer without eating, not because it's restrictive, but because your blood sugar is more stable, because you feel better and you feel great when you fast and you can break the fast when you want. There's a grace and a lightness to this where that's another component of the conversation that I'm having in intuitive fasting.
Yeah, that's so good. And I know obviously in your inflammation book as well, you talk a lot about that because, when we're talking about elimination diet, we'll pull out things that are most common sensitivities, but, there could be things that, everybody, we might say, for example, blueberries are a great food, but you may not react well to blueberries. And so if you are eating blueberries, even though you and me, even though they hear my podcast and I say, blueberries are the best food, they're so rich in antioxidants, but you eat it and you don't feel good, then it's not going to be good for you. Right. So you've got to really listen to your body. And, Dr. Will, I don't know if you know my story, but that's actually how I found fasting because in 2005, I had irritable bowel and it got to the point where I actually ended up losing 30 pounds and I was in the beginning of graduate school. And I had orthostatic hypotension. I go from sitting to standing, feel really dizzy. And I just started noticing, and I read The Maker's Diet by Jordan Rubin. and, made
Yes.
a lot of changes in my diet. Right. And, but I noticed that I used to eat a big bowl of oatmeal for breakfast, and, I took that
Mhm.
out. Right. And I just started drinking water, and I used to have 7 a.m. classes and things like that. And so I would just get really busy, and I stopped eating breakfast, and I felt significantly better. And I had never heard the term intermittent fasting in 2005.
Mhm.
And I started gaining weight. I was stronger in the gym, had better energy. And I would eat from like I would get hungry around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I would eat, typically like 2 meals, finish up around 7 o'clock or so, somewhere around there.
Mhm.
And I gained my weight back, got my strength back. And people were like, wow, they just saw the transformation that I was going through. And they're like,
Mhm.
what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm drinking a gallon of water between the time I wake up and noon. And I thought it was the water because I had never heard of the term fasting, but it was kind of this intuitive approach, you
Yes,
know?
yes.
And so,
That's
so
funny.
interesting.
I totally agree with you. I think that a lot of us are in the wellness world where we live and breathe this stuff. There is an intuition that not everybody they read the science and they hear us talking about it and pontificating about it. And I want people to get that context of what you and I live, like just like the way that we operate and function. And we're okay with pivoting. We're okay with experimenting. We're okay with checking in with our body and adjusting it accordingly. And there's not a rigidness. There's not this sort of dogmatic nature to how we live our lives. And I want the rest of the world to have that too, to have a mindful approach to these things, these things are tools to help us better our life. This shouldn't be a source of shame or obsession or restriction or dread. Feeling great is a place, I call it in the book food peace. It's like, how do we get to this place of like this resolute peace, this inner knowingness, this discernment on what's working for you and what's not working for you. And this whole conversation that's happening in the world today about fasting or wellness and calling it diet culture or restriction, it's what's restrictive is feeling lousy. Having fatigue is restrictive. Being bound by autoimmune issues, that's restrictive. Being bound by hangriness and insatiable cravings, that's restrictive. So what I'm talking about is really feeling and being our best selves, feeling great. And that's food peace and freedom to live the life that you were created for. So that's a major part that I wanted to have around this conversation about intuitive fasting. And just because something's common in our world doesn't necessarily mean it's normal. And really having a conversation about how humans can actually feel and doing things that actually are in alignment with our biochemistry. But it's interesting that Jordan Rubin's book, Maker's Diet, was like a pivotal point for you. For me, it was in the late 90s before I was in health and wellness. I was a teenager, but I read his first book, which I don't even know it had a publisher.
Yeah.
I think it was just like a self-published book. It was called Patient Heal Thyself.
Right.
Which it had like a picture of Jordan Rubin, like before and after. That was like, for me, an early book for me as like a weird teenager. Like he talked about fasting then too. So it's interesting that the same guy
Exactly.
was like a pivotal point for us.
Yeah, I mean, he got a lot of books out there, so he definitely influenced a lot of people. I'm sure we've read a lot of the same books, especially as we grew up around the same age, and so I'm sure we can talk a lot about that.
Yeah.
But when we talk about fasting, it's kind of like what you said. There's some people that really swear by it, right? I would consider myself a fasting evangelist, right? But there's a lot of people out there that are really concerned about it. They're concerned that this could, cause eating disorders for people. They're concerned about reactive hypoglycemia and going, multiple hours without food, and how that could affect your metabolism, and how that could, obviously cause poor eating habits in general, binging, things like that. And so what are your thoughts on all of that? Because I know you talk a little bit about that in the book.
I do. Well, I think like anything in the world, context matters. So it's very easy for us to say on both sides of the tribalist like conversation here, it's like, well, fasting's amazing and everybody more is better. And then the other side is like, no, fasting's disordered eating and or women shouldn't intermittent fast. And like the context lost on both sides. It's like, these are acts of hormesis. These are hormetic effects. They are amazing tools. So it's not about if it's good or bad, but how are you doing it that works for your body? And we're all different. This is the heart of functional medicine and what I do. And I think that that's really what I tried to bring home with intuitive fasting is what's intuitively right for your body at this
Mm.
time. And there will be seasons in our life where we need less fasting. There's going to be seasons of our life or even days within the week where we need less fasting. But it doesn't mean we can't leverage the amazing benefits cyclically or have this vacillating, ebbing and flowing relationship with this amazing tool. And, it's like any other hormetic effect, like high intensity interval training. We don't always do high intensity interval training, and where we don't say that HIIT training is bad for people. It's just, how are you doing it? How much are you doing it? Do you need to modify it? Yeah, that's there. Or take a break from it certain times. Or same with sauna therapy. Are we always in a sauna? Are we always doing cold therapy? No, these are all amazing tools. The context matters of how you're using them. So I talk about that at length in the book. And yes, could something like intermittent fasting be abused? Is it for people with eating disorders? No, it's not. But is it an amazing tool for the majority of the world that's struggling with metabolic problems? Absolutely. So as I say very clearly in intuitive fasting, this should not be and was not designed for, it's not an eating disorder disguised as a wellness practice. It is a tool to be used to better your life. If you have an eating disorder or a history of eating disorder, speak with your eating disorder specialist, speak with your doctor. And that's not to say that people with eating disorders in their past can't do it, because I'll tell you, there are many people in the intermittent fasting community, and specifically I've seen clinically with my patients and the intuitive fasting community, that they feel better than ever, because when you get better blood sugar balance, better brain function, lower neuroinflammation, and better hormone balance, that heals your relationship with food. Actually, you have a more of an agency over your life. Food isn't controlling you. You have that food piece that I talked about in the book. So I even then, it doesn't mean you can't do it, but you should talk to your doctor and your eating disorder specialist. But yeah, I think that people like to conflate chronic caloric restriction and diet culture with intermittent fasting. What we're talking about here is not chronic caloric restriction. It has nothing to do with that. So I think that people oftentimes they don't really understand what we're talking about, and then they just like about some judgment on it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I agree with you on multiple points there. I always say, if you've had a history of an eating disorder, you shouldn't be making that decision to do intermittent fasting on your own. It should be, with your psychologist, your counselor, or a really close friend, somebody that can hold you accountable to make sure that you don't slip back into those patterns. And like you said, it could be one of the best things for you, but you just got to make sure mentally, emotionally that you're ready, and that you don't slip back into bad behaviors. And then, just like you were talking about there with fasting, there's just a lot of nuances, with when it comes to exercise, not everybody's going to be on the same exercise program. It's kind of like that with fasting, depending on your level of baseline fitness, right? Metabolic flexibility. One person's going to do CrossFit 5 days a week, and that's going to be amazing for them, and they're going to have great fitness and feel fantastic. Somebody else does that and they're totally tanked. They're overtrained. And, so you got to customize it. And that's where the intuition comes in. That's really what you focus on in the book. Mm-hmm. And so let's go. I know you have like a 4-week plan in here. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that. And I know you use diet variation and feast famine cycling. So those are key topics that most of my audience is familiar with, but it would be good to go over that as well. And what that looks like.
Yeah. So, I mean, on the outside of it, I was putting the protocol together, and really these are all, each week is a different type of time compressed feeding window and different macronutrient. And these are all therapeutic tools that I use in functional medicine, that we all use in functional medicine to bring about positive change in somebody's health, improve labs, improve the quality of life. But I was quite aware of the, without people understanding the context of the book, they're going to think, well, why the heck is he giving us a protocol when he's talking about intuitive fasting? Well, the reason why I'm giving the protocol is actually to build metabolic flexibility, which is fertile foundation for intuitive awareness on what works for your body and what doesn't. So the analogy that I use in the book is like this proverbial yoga class for your metabolism. If someone's inflexible, like their hamstrings are tight, they're not really strong, they would go to a yoga class and they would think, oh, yoga is unnatural. There's nothing natural about yoga. This is really difficult. How are people moving like this? and they could say yoga's not for me. Well, it's not yoga's fault. It's your inflexibility. That's the same thing with intermittent fasting. It's that if someone's metabolically inflexible, bound by those insatiable cravings and hangriness and blood sugar problems, fasting won't be anything but intuitive. But as they lean into this and stretch and contract their metabolism with these vacillating, ebbing and flowing fasting and eating windows and macronutrient variations too, we can start to train that metabolism similar to yoga, improving someone's flexibility and strength. That's what I want for people's metabolisms, their mitochondria, their microbiome, the rest of their body. So each week is different. We start with a 12-12 in week 1, 12-12 time restricted feeding window, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. In the fasting world, like we know that most people in the fasting world will think that's like the most uncool, unsexiest type of fast ever. Like, what the heck? This is basic. It's basic on purpose. That's why I'm doing it, because I really want people to get a foundation of it's like that beginner yoga class. You have to get a baseline for what works for your body. And some people that are reading the book, they're like, well, I already do 14 or 16, 18 hours. Like, should I go back to 12-12? I would say, yeah, try it out. Go back to 12-12. Give yourself a bigger eating window. Just go back to not eating too late at night. Sometimes the bigger eating window for a time can be really good at shaking things up on many levels when it comes to hormones and microbiome function and overall. But we're pairing that with a ketotarian way of eating, which is the name of my first book, but it's basically a Mediterranean ketogenic diet for 12-12, because you're mimicking a lot of the benefits of fasting without actually fasting, because you're still supporting ketosis. So it's a good foundation. And then in week 2, we go into about a 16 or 18 hour fast. There's a flexibility there. So I want people to lean into it and be progressing into it. But that's the metabolic recharge week. So week 1's the body reset. Then week 2 is metabolic recharge. And week 3 is a cellular renewal fast. So it's a non-consecutive. So for weeks 1 and 2, it was all whole week.
Daily.
Daily, right. Week 3 is non-consecutive, almost OMAD week. So we're really looking at the research around autophagy and stem cells and longevity benefits, but almost OMAD, because I find that getting all your calories in for the average person in that 1 hour, more traditional 23-1 fasting to eating window, that a traditional 1 meal a day or OMAD is difficult for some people. So by being a little bit more flexible, allowing your gut to a bit of a longer time to digest things and make it a little bit more accessible for people. And it's non-consecutive. So you have refeeding days in between the almost OMAD days. So almost OMAD meaning 20 to 22 hours versus a 23. So it's a little bit more flexibility there. Then week 4, we're opening back up 12, but we're increasing clean carbohydrates. So I talk a lot about progesterone and thyroid hormone and all of the hormonal context that's important for this conversation around fasting, because they think I can't do it. I heard that cycling women can't do it. I talk a lot about that in the book, of how to leverage these benefits. So you can get both. You can get the best of both worlds. You can gain metabolic flexibility and all the amazing health benefits of fasting without thinking more is better. And then over time, you can impact your hormones in a way that we don't want.
Yeah. And that's key. And, one of the big components there is it's not like an all or none. Like, for a lot of people, they think, okay, if you're intermittent fasting, it has to be all or none. Like you have to do a 16-hour fast every day for the rest of your life to get the benefits, or at least like 5 days a week or something like that. And you don't necessarily, for some people, you're just going to notice you feel a lot better doing it. Right. And there are other people that don't feel as well doing like that. So they've got to do it more intermittently or cyclically, kind of like what you're talking about there. And I think your book is really designed for the people. And you share a similar mindset as me. Like when I'm teaching somebody how to do intermittent fasting, I want them to have a great experience. If they have a great experience up front, then that's going to be a practice that they're going to have for the rest of their life. This is something, we call it a fasting lifestyle. This is a lifestyle. This is something you want to be doing for the rest of your life. So if you have a bad experience, you're less likely to go back to that. And by kind of doing it in this sort of 4-week plan, you're, hedging your bets that, those challenging cases, like, for example, the very lean, very active, menstruating female. That's kind of the probably the hardest population, to get on the right plan, because they have a lot of things going on with their hormones. They're already lean in body fat. And so that's sending certain signals to their brain about, basically energy reserves and energy conserving energy and thyroid function and all that kind of stuff. And so you're hedging your bets by doing this to where they can get the benefits, the autophagy, the reduction in inflammation, the improvement in the microbiome, healing the gut, but at the same time, not, overwhelm their system and still be able to produce the right amount of hormones so they can function well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then because I've heard just about every, excuse or reason or should I do this or should I do that? I tried to put as many tailorings and pivot points throughout the protocol where they can check in with their body intuitively and say, oh, I need a little bit more of this. I want to do a little bit more of this. I want to do less of that. And that's what I really want, is after you've cycled through the 4-week protocol, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 times, you're going to learn a lot about your body, because I brought mindfulness practices throughout the 4 weeks where they can really check in with their body, check in with their energy levels, check in with their digestion, check in with their relationship with food, check in with their relationship with fasting, and use food and fasting as a mindfulness practice. They will have built a lot of things physically for them, improve their health, et cetera. But B, they would have grown in awareness around food and fasting. That at a certain point, after you cycle through the 4-week protocol, you will evolve the protocol to suit your body. So then you'll know intuitively, like you said, like one day you'll wake up and do an 18 and the next day you won't. That's what intuitive fasting is about. As you've gained metabolic flexibility, but also learned about yourself, that is fertile foundation for this, what I'm talking about, this more mindful approach to these wellness tools. It doesn't have to be super stuck in the mind where it's like, you have to do this, or if you're a failure, or you have to shame yourself. It's not about that at all. These are all tools that improve our lives.
Yeah. Ultimately, the art of getting well and, the art of healing and really functioning at our best. I mean, it's kind of like getting an advanced college degree. It takes time, right? It takes a lot of experience. You don't have it in a month, right? It's something that you're progressing, you're learning about yourself and how your body responds to different stressors that you're putting it under, and what the right threshold is for you. And so you're giving a basic template. It's basic, but it's also actually an advanced template, right? So it's a basic template from the perspective that, it's an easy way to start, right? You're starting by walking rather than running. But then you start gently increasing your speed, ramping things up, right? And then kind of coming down gracefully, kind of landing gracefully in a sense. And then that gives somebody a template to understand how they've experienced multiple different types of fasts, and that can help them start to kind of customize it for themselves, right? And listen to their own intuition. So I think that's really great.
Thank you. Yeah, that's another thing too. You're right. Is that they'll be able to experiment with all these different types of fasts. And that's what I've seen already with the intuitive fasting community online, is that they are evolving the protocol as they intuitively grow in metabolic flexibility. And we're all different. That's bioindividuality. That's the heart of functional medicine. So it's so important. It's cool to see the context come through on this, where we know the amazing science around intermittent fasting, to really have people experiment it for themselves and they can make it work for them long-term. Because that, like you said, when you start feeling good, that's encouraging. But when you also know this can be flexible, where it's like very much something you can continue to do, is really important from is this going to serve you long-term, which is what I really wanted for people.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about you personally. What is your typical fasting cycle, your typical intuitive fasting cycle, like on a weekly to monthly basis?
Well, I mean, the other side of this, the protocol in the book, is it's honestly things that I do all the time for myself. So it's really the protocol, and intuitive fasting is something that I do. And I'll oftentimes and especially when I was writing the book, I really did it exactly how I put it in the book, just to continue to refine it and make the best it could be. Because, as a clinician, when you're talking to people and you're consulting people via webcam, like I do, it's different because the science and the art's a lot more, you're seeing the person, their labs, how to make this work, and you can adjust it and tailor it specific to them. When you're writing a book and you're not there clinically monitoring somebody, it's a completely different world from an educator's standpoint. So I needed to make this protocol make sense if I wasn't there managing the case. So I went through and I really did it on my own as I was writing the book. But the reality is it's what I do, but I do it intuitively. So one day I'll show up and I'll do an 18-hour day. I really like the 18-hour fast. I do that probably more than anything when I'm consulting patients, because I'm here 10, 11 hours a day at the clinic.
Yeah.
And I love the morning. Just I'm really sharp in the morning, and then I break my fast around lunchtime, and I feel fueled for the afternoon and super sharp. Then there's the grace and the lightness that I have there. But then maybe one day I'll show up in the morning and I really want breakfast, and I'll do a 12-12 and I'll have a bigger refeeding day. So it's constantly ebbing and flowing intuitively for me, and I can have a plan for the next day. But I can wake up in the morning and have the awareness of what my body needs at that morning to say, you know what, I planned for that deeper fast. I'm not going to do it today. I need a little bit more refueling today. I'm going to take it easier. And that is what I want people to have for themselves. Like today, I'm doing an OMAD day. I'm doing a little bit more of an OMAD week this week, which is a little bit modified. It's a little bit more brothing in the afternoon. I'm doing fast for the better part of the day. And then the transition break the fast meal that I talk about in intuitive fasting for me is just broth. And then I'm having a dinner in the afternoon. So that's what I'm doing this week. But, and I feel great doing it, but I don't always do that.
Yeah, that's a great way to break the fast too, with something like broth or a smoothie or something like that, especially when you're doing OMAD, because, after a certain period of time, you start producing less digestive juices. So when you do break that fast, if you're fasting for 22 hours or something like that, you want something nice and gentle, at least initially, right? To kind of kickstart things. You can munch on some ginger or, drink some ginger herbal tea. That can help as well. But doing like broth or a smoothie, things like that can be really helpful. I know you talk about some of that in your book. You talk about some of the herbal teas too that you like to drink while you're fasting.
Yeah, I love tea, man. I think tea's one of the best fasting drinks there is, because you have all even from Earl Grey tea with the bergamot and the supporting autophagy pathways, which fasting already does, to the wide array of different types of green teas and black teas with the caffeinated types of true teas from Camellia sinensis. But then look at the amount of herbal teas out there, like you said, like ginger tea to support digestion, or rooibos or hibiscus. Or there's so many amazing teas out there. So I really wanted to highlight them, because it was kind of on a selfish level. It was like my chance to write about tea in a fasting book, because I like talking about teas. But it actually served a purpose, because I know it makes someone's fast a lot easier. It can curb appetite, and it's something to enjoy because they all taste differently. So it's enjoyable during your fast. So I think it's a great tool, and I want
and warm beverages are very good. They actually help stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system, your vagus nerve. And one of the big challenges if people are not moving their bowels well, right? If you're more constipated, you're going to have a lot more trouble fasting, because now you've got gut-induced endotoxemia, where you've got all this, bad bacterial waste and, food that's in your system that's fermenting, and it's starting to get in your bloodstream because it's not moving through your system. And sometimes just a warm drink, right? Coffee is known for helping, and the caffeine's part of that. And there's also caffeine in herbal teas, green tea, things like that. And that will help, because that will help contract the intestines, but also just the warm drink will stimulate the vagus nerve, stimulate more of that peristaltic activity. You have some good bowel movements in the beginning of your fast that really sets you up for success.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely something people need to check in with themselves, because there's any change of food changes, any change of eating patterns like fasting can shift the microbiome, and we want to make sure things are moving appropriately, and checking in with your digestion as well as using that as a mindful practice as well, because you have to be on top of these things.
Yeah, so true. So let's talk about, you went through again those 4 weeks. What were the names of each week?
Yeah.
Talk about what's actually happening in each of those weeks, other than just the fasting strategy. You talked about the strategy, but I want to know more about what's happening physiologically.
Yeah. So I really wanted to highlight the research that's out there in the journals
Hmm.
in the corresponding week that we're really kind of highlighting. I mean, look,
Yeah.
and these are all interconnected because the state of ketosis, the state of autophagy, the state of hormesis, the state of lowering inflammation levels, all the benefits that we're talking about, they are so interconnected. So
Yeah.
what I really wanted to do is saying like, what's the research pointing to with like different types of fasts? What are a lot of the studies looking at with this type of fast? So it worked out well where it was week 1 was body reset. So let me just preface all this. It's
Yeah.
reset, recharge, renew, rebalance. That's the
Yep.
4 weeks. But specifically, the science around it is like the body reset fast. The reason why I call it that is like, okay, 12-12, there's really cool research on looking at the microbiome circadian rhythm, how certain colonies of bacteria are higher in the morning, some are higher in the evening. So by doing just a simple don't eat too late at night, allowing your body to fast through the night until you break the fast the next day when you have breakfast, it's resetting the body and the microbiome. So week 1 is body reset. Week 2, metabolic recharge. Metabolic, I'm talking about cardiometabolic markers of insulin resistance, really, and all the research that's in the studies of looking somewhere 14 to 18 hour time restricted feeding windows and all the cardiometabolic improvements,
Mm.
lowering insulin
Yep.
resistance, lowering inflammation, improving insulin sensitivity, all that cool stuff. So that's what I'm highlighting in week 2. Week 3, cellular renewal. It's the deeper fasts talking about autophagy and stem cells and longevity and sirtuins and all that stuff. And then week 4, hormone rebalance. It's the conversation about cycling. It's the
Yeah.
conversation of like, how do we increase support progesterone function and support thyroid conversion and support cortisol balance, all that stuff. So that those are the 4 weeks and the names of them.
Yeah, so good. And we know that insulin gets a bad rap because insulin is actually a life-saving hormone, right? If we have uncontrolled high blood sugar, those sugar molecules will bind to proteins and create sticky proteins, advanced glycation end products, and then they damage nerves and kidneys and all this kind of stuff. So, insulin takes the sugar out of the bloodstream and puts it into the cells. Problem is that in our society, we're constantly shooting up insulin. And so that's where fasting really comes in because it's the best. You can follow a low carb diet, but you're still going to produce more insulin with that than you would fasting, right? So fasting really brings that insulin down.
Mm-hmm.
However, we can also bring it down too far, and we need insulin for a
Mm-hmm.
lot of hormonal function. So, by like that week 4 where you're talking about, okay, now we're cycling,
Mm-hmm.
right? What you're doing there is we've already suppressed insulin because you've done the OMAD for several days, which suppressed your insulin levels. And now you're shooting it back up, right? And talk about the benefits there.
Yeah. So, and I would say the insulin and then leptin, I find too, is like,
Yeah.
which they go hand in hand oftentimes. But what I've seen clinically is, especially like you said, the people that are already leaner to begin with, and they're looking to fast for longevity, improving brain function, lowering inflammation, gut health. Like those are the top typical reasons why they're fasting or just wanting to be healthier. Where if your leptin's already normal going into the fast, and for people that don't know, I mean, most of your people know, but basically it's a hormone that your fat cells produce. And a lot of people are leptin resistant. Their hypothalamic cells of the brain, the receptor sites are blunted, and leptin's high on labs when we run them. And they're high a lot for a lot of people, but not everybody. So it depends on what we're coming in with this. So those clean carb cycling days, those modifiable adjustments to the protocol can happen at any point for someone that's cycling female, that she can make it around her cycle. So basically clean carb cycling around her period and around ovulation. It doesn't have to be bound by just that 4 week. There's other adjustments throughout the 4 weeks. But leptin is something that we want to be in the sweet spot, just like insulin. But insulin and leptin, we don't want them too high, not too low. It's the Goldilocks principle. We want it just right. And the problem is ketosis in this low carb ketotic state for too long. For some people, it's going to create this not a good problem either. They're going to feel it's going to create fatigue. It's going to create they're kind of stuck at this plateau. But by having the variability, it modulates it up a little bit, and you'll see insulin come back up and leptin come back up. It'll move them past their plateau. So I think a lot of times this tool within what I'm talking about, intuitive fasting, is really good for people that have been in the keto community for a long time, people that have been in the fasting community for a long time, because they think, well, it's worked really well for me for a long time. Like, why am I stuck at this plateau? Well, shake things up a bit. Like variability is a good thing. You're not a failure. Like, and higher ketones at all costs isn't the name of the game long term for most people. And you're still maintaining metabolic flexibility with these slight pivot points.
Yeah, absolutely. I think really what you're really going for is you want to have the ability, like our ancestors, they weren't trying to avoid carbs. So, when they found berries, when they found fruit, when they found, starch, they ate as much as they could. They feasted on it, but it was just for short seasons because that stuff doesn't, grow year round. They didn't always have access to it. And you want your body to have the ability to have a higher carb day, right? But then be able to, if you wanted to, be able to fast the next day, right? Or go low carb and feel good, right? And so really food now becomes more of something that, obviously you're trying to choose healthy, nutritious food, but at the same time, you're not fearful of the foods that you're around. And you're also not fearful of fasting. You go through periods of time where food isn't around, or you're just really busy and you're not fearful. Instead, you're embracing those times.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. That's food peace. I mean, that's not being bound by the next craving and the next snack. Like, I know some people, even in my own family, I'm not going to call them out, but they will have a panic attack if they don't have a snack on hand. And that's no way to live. That's not fun. Or they just are like, they can't control those insatiable cravings. And they wouldn't be people that you would be able to diagnose them with an eating disorder. But I think there's a larger eating disorder spectrum that's going on in our country today, where it's like, that's pretty disordered eating too. That's not a diagnosable eating disorder, but it's an unhealthy relationship with food that we just normalize in our culture. It's just every day. And just, how are we in alignment with our physiology, basically?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so good, guys. The book is Intuitive Fasting. And the cool thing is it's a fasting book, but he's actually got a ton of recipes in here too. So he found a way to throw in a whole bunch of recipes, which, people really enjoy in the book. He also goes a deep dive into like different herbal teas, like we were talking about, and how to use those. And, it's just really well written. There's a lot of really great content in here. Guys, if you guys have liked and enjoyed my content and my books, I know you're going to like this book. So definitely check it out. Intuitive Fasting by Dr. Will Cole. You can find it on Amazon and drwillcole.com as well. You can follow him on social media. Any last words of inspiration for our audience?
I appreciate it, man. I appreciate the conversation and what you bring to the space. I think that people are going to love the book. And I think that all of these things, what I really hope is that when people have a healthy relationship with food and fasting and use this tool to better their life, what happens is that health becomes infectious because other people see the light that you have in your life. And I see it all the time where it's like their family members and their friends and their spouses want to get involved too. So I just want to, I like how you said it, a fasting evangelist. So I think that that's the same way how I feel of like, how do you spread these amazing tools that can better your life?
Absolutely. Well, fasting is really the most ancient, inexpensive, and powerful healing tool known to mankind. I've been saying that for a long time. And I think it's something that everybody can implement at some level, some degree, really for the rest of your life and get incredible health benefits and live a longer life, have more energy, better brain function, and, be more present for the people in your life. And, Dr. Will's book is a great guide for helping you get started and helping you kind of work through different challenges and nuances that come with fasting. So guys, check that out. Will, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate you so much. And I guess after another 100 episodes, we'll have to get you back on again.
You get to come on my podcast.
I know. We'll do it for sure.
Okay.
All right, my friends, be blessed.
See ya.